21 years ago, a plane piloted by John F. Kennedy Jr. crashed into the Atlantic Ocean. On board were also his wife, Carolyn Bessette, and her sister. All three died instantly. Despite the fact that, on the eve of the tragedy, the marriage of the American prince and his Cinderella was already on the verge of collapse, provoked by growing disagreements between the spouses and pressure from the press, the couple ultimately kept the promise they had made at the altar: to be together until death did them part. Long before meeting his future wife, John F. Kennedy Jr. had gained a reputation as America's most famous bachelor, and the press referred to him as none other than the irresistibly handsome John John. He had captured the hearts of the entire world while still a small child. Shortly after his father was elected President of the United States, photographs were published showing little John walking through the White House with his father and playing under the desk in the Oval Office while John F. Kennedy Sr. worked. When the president was assassinated, his son was only 2 years old. John F. Kennedy Jr.'s third birthday fell on the same day as his father's funeral. The image of the boy in a blue dress coat and short pants, saluting his father's coffin, was etched into the memory of all Americans. On that sad day, he became, in a sense, the son of the nation, a child whose fate concerned everyone. John grew up under the constant flash of cameras. While studying at Brown University, he developed a serious interest in acting, which deeply worried his mother, Jacqueline. It is widely believed that it was under her persistent persuasion that John abandoned his dream of pursuing a career in film and instead chose the more respectable profession of law. Nevertheless, the press followed his every step as closely as if he were a genuine Hollywood celebrity. In 1988, People magazine named him the sexiest man alive. It was therefore no surprise that John was immensely popular with beautiful women. He was rumored to have had romances with Cindy Crawford, Madonna, Daryl Hannah, Sarah Jessica Parker, and even Princess Diana. It seemed there was no woman in the world who could remain indifferent to the courtship of this charismatic and incredibly charming American prince. Yet John himself was not particularly interested in starting a family, at least not until 1993, when he walked into a Calvin Klein boutique in New York and discovered, to his own surprise, that he could not take his eyes off a blonde young woman with an angelic appearance who politely offered to help him choose a suit. At the time she met the son of the nation, Carolyn Bessette was a senior public relations manager working with VIP clients. She had worked very hard to reach that position. Unlike John, Carolyn grew up in a modest family. Her father was a carpenter, and her mother was a school teacher. From an early age, she was interested in fashion. She had worked as a model and a fashion commentator before eventually moving into public relations. She had no interest in loud global fame. She simply enjoyed what she did. Carolyn was absolutely charming, very sociable, and never felt shy working with VIP clients, her boss said about her in those years. Friends described Carolyn as a cheerful and intelligent woman who could find common ground with anyone within minutes of meeting them. In other words, she was very different from the majority of show business stars John F. Kennedy Jr. was accustomed to dealing with. Perhaps it was precisely this natural ease and openness that captivated the son of the nation. From the moment they first met, John became obsessed with Carolyn, one of his friends later said. He practically lived and breathed her. He began visiting the Calvin Klein boutique in Manhattan more and more often. She gratefully accepted his attention. However, John and Carolyn did not begin officially dating until about a year after their first meeting. Rumors about the American prince's new romance quickly leaked into the press, and one day Carolyn discovered a photographer waiting outside her home. Soon, entire crowds of journalists were following her everywhere. Members of the press and tabloid readers wanted to know everything about John's new love interest, where she worked, what her hobbies were, and even what she preferred to eat for breakfast. One tabloid even decided to split its front page into two parts, one dedicated to the day's major news, and the other featuring a large photograph of Carolyn walking her dog in the park. This media attention became a difficult ordeal for Bessette, but at that time, feelings clearly prevailed. By 1995, she had moved in with her boyfriend in a spacious loft in Tribeca. A few months later, photographers managed to capture the engagement ring on Carolyn's finger. The news that the American prince, who could have had any woman in the world, was planning to marry a poor and completely unknown commoner became a true sensation that no publication could ignore. Details of John and Carolyn's romance were widely covered in newspapers and on television. All of this deeply unsettled the bride of the former U.S. president's son and inevitably affected the couple's relationship. Arguments began to erupt between them, and journalists even witnessed one such incident in Central Park in 1996. During a heated quarrel, Carolyn removed her engagement ring and demonstratively threw it at her fiancé. John burst into tears. Photographs of the fight were purchased by the National Enquirer for $250,000, and blurry footage of the couple arguing aired on various talk shows for several days afterward. These images became Carolyn's worst nightmare because they made her look like some kind of cruel harpy, said George Rush, who wrote a column for the New York Daily News in the 1990s. I don't think she ever fully recovered from that blow. On September 21, 1996, John and Carolyn exchanged wedding vows in a tiny wooden chapel on Cumberland Island, Georgia. Only their closest friends attended, and some members of the Kennedy family learned about the wedding only the next day from newspapers. In the single photograph published in the press, the newlyweds are descending the church steps. Carolyn, wearing a flowing pearl-white dress by Narciso Rodriguez, looks lovingly at her husband as he kisses her hand. It was there, on the ocean shore, far away from the merciless tabloids, that they were truly happy. But after 2 weeks of their honeymoon, they had to return to New York. Although Carolyn had left Calvin Klein 6 months before the wedding, John still had obligations in the city. Early in the morning on October 6th, when most New Yorkers were still asleep, John stepped onto the porch of his Tribeca loft, where a crowd of reporters was already waiting for him. Despite the early hour, he appeared in a formal, dark blue suit, emphasizing the seriousness of the statement he intended to make that day. John understood perfectly how much his beloved suffered from the intrusive attention of paparazzi, and he intended to put a stop to it. "I'm simply asking you to give her some personal space while she tries to adjust to all of this," he said loudly, trying to rise above the cacophony of clicking cameras. "We would be very grateful." He then disappeared back inside his apartment, only to reappear seconds later with his wife, who clung to his hand as if it were a lifeline. At that moment, Carolyn looked frightened, but her husband's calm confidence seemed to give her strength. As one might have expected, John's request went unheard. From then on, photographs of Carolyn appeared not only in tabloids but also in glossy magazines. The entire fashion world suddenly fell at the feet of Kennedy's wife. The frenzy only irritated her further. She ignored all requests for interviews and photo shoots, and whenever she encountered paparazzi on the street, she lowered her eyes and tried to remain unrecognized. Needless to say, that never worked. Eventually, Carolyn almost stopped leaving the house altogether. Her sudden disappearance from the media spotlight created fertile ground for countless rumors. Tabloids immediately began writing that Carolyn was pregnant, possibly not by John, or that she had left him for another man. In reality, she simply longed for privacy. John, of course, could not remain indifferent to the suffering of the woman he loved. Perhaps it was difficult for the heir of such a famous clan, accustomed to publicity, to understand Carolyn completely, but he truly loved her and tried to make her life happy. Over time, however, it became clear that they understood the concept of happiness very differently. John dreamed of having children, but Carolyn did not want to think about it. She was horrified by the thought that the paparazzi who had turned her life into hell would do the same to her son or daughter. "I wanted a child," John once said, "but whenever I brought the subject up with Carolyn, she would turn away from me." Amid growing tensions in the marriage, John continued his professional life, devoting even more time to it than before. He founded the political magazine George, met with friends, and went to the gym in the evenings. He often invited Carolyn to go out with him, but she always refused. John's life was very full, a close friend of the couple said, and that was hard for Carolyn. She didn't want to go out. She refused to meet John's friends, appear at dinners, visit people, or attend events. She burned a lot of bridges. Soon Carolyn began to show all the signs of clinical depression, worsened by the use of illegal substances. While John met with partners trying to find additional funding for his magazine, his wife struggled with jealousy and spent time in their loft with members of the bohemian scene of questionable reputation, who supplied her with drugs. John's patience was beginning to run out. He was ready to do anything to revive their relationship, and he insisted they see a family therapist. However, therapy produced no results. According to acquaintances of the couple, Carolyn simply got up from the couch and walked out when the psychologist raised the subject of drugs. In July 1999, John managed to persuade his wife to attend the wedding of his cousin Rory. Carolyn hated Kennedy family gatherings, but she agreed on the condition that her sister accompany them. On July 16th, it seemed that everything conspired against their plans. Carolyn suffered from a severe headache and became stuck in traffic after a long shopping trip in search of a wedding gift. John's ankle, injured shortly before, was also bothering him. Nevertheless, with a significant delay, at 8:30 in the evening, a small private plane piloted by John F. Kennedy Jr. took off. It was already dark. About an hour after departure, the aircraft disappeared from air traffic controllers' radar. As the investigation later revealed, the crash occurred because the inexperienced pilot became spatially disoriented, confused by the instrument readings, and, without external visual references, inadvertently sent the plane into a fatal spiral.